Hi, thanks for... Are we recording? Hi, thank you for joining myself, Steve Hayes, Michael Darby from Element as we go through our regular Tea Time Top Tips. It is getting towards the end of 2024 and so this session is just a roundup of the different regulatory forums that we've participated in, either individually or together. And Element has been participating in, and really the whole point of these is to update you on conversations of the industry, what's changing in the industry from a regulatory point of view, and any other things that are relevant to manufacturers to get your products onto the market. So I guess, let's start. Where should we start? Wow. TCB Council?
TCB Council, good place to start. So that was back in October in Baltimore, in Maryland, in the USA. And so it's a 3-day event, and they cover lots of topics, the FCC, Canada, and then some international technology inputs. So often these workshops, they'll tend to be a bit of a theme, whether that's intentional or not. And often there'll be a certain thing where you come away thinking, wow, this was really about this time. And I would say if you were to look at how much time was spent talking about Wi-Fi in these higher frequency bands, the kind of Wi-Fi 6E band, the 6 gigahertz, and in particular the Wi-Fi 7 protocol seem to take up a lot of time. If you've heard of different equipment class types like low power indoors or very low power types of device. So the FCC had a lot of information for everybody, and so did ISED Canada, all about these types of device, where they can be used, can they be used in vehicles, what kind of power are they allowed to transmit at, things like that, how to do an RF exposure assessment, how to do all the EMC and radio testing. So that was a good part of the workshop really related to that type of technology. Also, radio modules, always a big topic. We've been working closely with the FCC to help them improve and develop their guidance, their KDB, their sort of knowledge database document, and that's been republished to make some clarifications for cellular module antennas. And so that's all good, exciting stuff. Other things, the FCC continue to work on their new guidance for RF exposure. If anybody is a regular watcher of these webinars, I think I could just copy and paste me saying we're expecting to have the new guidance soon. That still applies, and when it comes out there'll be hopefully a big long transition period. What else? There's a lot of work again on radio modules with regard to the instructions from the module manufacturer to the installer of a module to make sure that things are really being done correctly, especially if there's something about the module that means it's what's known as a limited modular approval.
You're talking about radio modules and TCB Council meeting. I think we're going to pick up on radio modules separately. So look out for that video because it will come out separately. But whether we're talking about the US, Europe, other regions around the world, radio regulations and radio modules is a really big topic, and it has been like forever, right? Yeah. And it's just got more and more complicated as more things, more requirements have been added to these different sets of requirements, whether it be integrating it into a host, what does that do, the implication on the host itself, cyber, all of those sorts of things. So I didn't want to sort of detract you from the TCB stuff, but really just to highlight that radio modules continue to be a big topic of discussion and something that we as Element really probably leading on in terms of inputting directly into some of the regulatory forums and guidance documents that come as a result of that. So yeah, be sure to follow that and
I think it's a good point. I think, as Steve said, we'll do a separate video on this. I maintain it is the most complex thing you can do in regulatory and industry approvals because there's so much choice and decision, but not just in a guesswork, in engineering judgment, legal consequences, much more complicated than just a regular smartphone, for example.
Because they're dead easy.
Because they're dead easy, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, The FCC are also introducing their own cybersecurity requirements. Early days so far, but the rules are in place, but the testing requirements are not in place. This will be a voluntary requirement and such that it'll be in the FCC rules, but it won't be part of the mandatory certification. You'll still have your mandatory certification or SDOC routes for FCC compliance, but this will be an optional cybersecurity labeling where you could choose to get your IoT product tested and certified by a specific lab and certification body, and then that would allow you to put a cyber label on your product so that consumers could look at the IoT device and say, this one's a good one, it's got the FCC cyber label on it. Hearing aid compatibility, if you're into smartphones or mobile phones that are able to work with hearing aids. In the past, it was an optional thing that some models of phone could support. Now there's been a recent vote to say that all phones that are going to get certified for the FCC for USA must have this hearing aid compatibility. So there's a lot of information on that. In fact, one of Elements Labs in the USA was giving an update presentation on that.
I mean, just picking up on that, because you're talking about FCC requirements, it is actually one of the things from our Maryland labs that we focus quite heavily on, but we also offer that from Korea as well. Right. So that's a really niche area for smartphones and mobile devices, as you say.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the FCC, you know, if you wanted to know what kind of things do people get wrong, it was ranging everything from the real complex, you know, I've got this radio module, I've put it into these products, my module doesn't quite do this, how do I do it? The most complicated, or Wi-Fi 7 in the Wi-Fi 6E band, all the way down to the FCC pointing out that products were coming into the USA without a label on it, without an FCC ID on it, or the test reports not being formatted correctly, or the lab not really knowing what they're doing. So all the way from the very most complicated topics, all the way down to the label fell off the product. And all of these topics people are getting wrong. And so, you know, it's easy for people like myself and Steve who've been in this for years to always be looking at the most exciting, interesting, oh, look at this crazy measurement of how this Wi-Fi 7 protocol works. And then if people are making products where the label falls off, it's just as non-compliant. And so when I say non-compliant, I think we all agree we're not worried about getting told off by teacher. We're really worried about not being able to get our products onto the market and therefore losing a lot of business and revenue in that way.
Absolutely, yeah. Just while you're talking about it, one of the things that Michael and I, are always conscious of is making sure that we pitch these things to what the level that everybody wants them at. Because we can start talking in code quite a lot with all the acronyms that we have in our world of regulatory compliance. And interestingly enough, one of the most popular things that we ever did was write a little article on what's the difference between EMC and EMI. And so we have to keep reminding ourselves that we've been on a journey, each of us for 30 odd years in this industry, and there'd be people that are just joining the industry and not necessarily as familiar with some of the topics that we're talking about. So if that applies to you, make sure that you feed back to us topics that you'd like to hear about on future videos, because the whole point of this is us downloading what's happening in the industry and providing content that's relevant to you. So be sure to do that.
Yeah. And then finally at the workshop, Canada talked quite a lot, very useful presentations as always. One big message I want to remind everybody, hopefully it's a reminder. So you probably know in the USA you do like a one-time authorization of a product and then you can keep selling that product. In Europe, the manufacturer does their own assessment to a bunch of standards and signs a declaration to say they meet the directive, and if any of the standards change, the manufacturer has to constantly keep up to speed with that. Canada is kind of somewhere in between, where you do a certification but to a standard, and then if the standard changes you have to update your certification even if you've been selling that product for years. Now In December 2023, Canada issued a new RF exposure document with a 1-year transition period, and it's really quite different to the old version. Well, that transition period will end on the 15th of December 2024, and we want to make sure that all the manufacturers selling into Canada have re-evaluated their products. Now, it might just be a paperwork issue of looking at the old version and looking at the new version and saying, none of the changes affect me. But for some products, it will be, wow, in the past, I didn't need to do a lengthy and expensive SAR test. Now I do need to do a lengthy and expensive SAR test. It's the end of November 2024 now. If you're only just figuring that out, that would have consequences for you. So sooner rather than later. So that was a big message from Canada. I think they're quite surprised at how many companies are still kind of listing the old version of the standard on their applications when they're going to have to reassess in less than a month's time anyway. So yeah, 3 days condensed into, it was probably about 10 minutes there.
Yeah. Great stuff. So that was TCB, end of October, as you say.
Yeah.
And then we had the Red CA meeting.
Yeah.
Was that that was November, beginning of November.
First week of November.
First week of November, down in Nice in France. Red CA, if you're not familiar, Red, Radio Equipment Directive, so CE marking for radio products in Europe, and then the CA, Compliance Association. And really that group is made up of the regulator, so the European Commission, and then various different stakeholders. So it involves people like ourselves, Element, as notified body and test labs. Manufacturers are there. The ESOs, the European Standards Organisations, manufacturers from all over the world, but then also other regulators, so people like NIST and MIC indirectly are represented in these forums as well. So although it's a worldwide thing, it's really focused on the European requirements. So that took place over, 3 days? 2.5 days? Yeah, 3 day period, certainly.
Yeah, something like that, first week of November.
Topics.
Swimming.
It has to be said, October, beginning of November, lovely time of year to swim in the sea.
Yeah, early morning swim before the meetings.
Absolutely.
But yeah, good, always useful meetings, these ones. Now, if anybody's been following the Radio Equipment Directive, it'd be no surprise that cybersecurity took up a lot of the time. Again, Steve and I think we're going to do a separate video going into cybersecurity for the Radio Equipment Directive, the Cyber Resilience Act and the FCC requirements in more detail, so look out for that video.
Yep.
But just to briefly mention, the group writing the 3 standards for the Radio Equipment Directive cybersecurity requirements, they've submitted those standards to the European Commission.
Well, first of all, they've been published.
They've been published, yes. So yeah, I guess very first of all is the requirement goes live on the 1st of August 2025. So any products placed on the market in the EU, if they are in scope of the Cyber Delegated Act, then they will need to be assessed for that when they hit the market from the 1st of August 2025. That's it's only a few months away. The standards got published early summer 2024. They were submitted to the European Commission's consultant, known as a HAS consultant. HAS consultant had negative comments. So, but what does that mean? So, it basically means that the review came back with negative comments, but now the standards writing group, CENELEC, are kind of going, okay, well, we accept those comments, but we're not going to change those standards. So it's in the hands of...
It's quite interesting, actually, that point, because I think that there were like literally hundreds of comments back from different national committees and HAS consultant, as you say. And from a standards writing perspective, when it gets to the final stages of submitting the document for national approvals, you're not really allowed to make technical changes at that point. And so of the comments that were received back, the group, the CENELEC group, the responsible for writing the standards, implemented lots of the editorial and general comments, and all the technical stuff sort of just got noted really and put on a wait list for an update to those standards will happen in due course. So all of these things there's lots of changes proposed, and we'll see that in future versions of the standard.
And future versions could be years, it could be well after, because those technical experts who are writing the standards, for a start, I think they feel like they've done a pretty good job. They've done the best job they could with the tools they had available to them. And now they're busily engaged writing the Cyber Resilience Act standards. So coming back to modify a document that they worked hard on because somebody had a comment about it, I don't see it as particularly high on their priority list. Even though they understand the importance of the Radio Equipment Directive, I think they're still saying, look, these are good standards.
So fundamentally, cyber was a big topic of discussion.
Yeah.
The August deadline is looming, and I think you've highlighted we're going to do a separate video on that, because there are lots of what's going to happen with those standards. Are they going to be listed in the official journal, which makes them harmonised standards, which give manufacturers presumption of conformity, or if not, having to go down the notified body route, blah blah blah. So we'll have that as a separate video discussion that we'll go into a little bit more detail about.
Exactly, and we'll explain about the notified body certificate. If a notified body was to issue a certificate, that certificate becomes a legally valid document from the 1st of August 2025 onwards. So, we'll talk about that in more detail.
The European Commission did one of the updates for Red CA, and probably is almost like the headline act, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they are the lawmaker, it's their directive, their regulation, and so there's a lot of anticipation with what's the European Commission going to say. And so talking about cyber was one of those. In terms of other things that were talked about by the Commission, I'm just trying to think now, what was the most pertinent, I guess, after that?
So probably a very small topic, but very important to many manufacturers, is Article 3.4 of the Radio Equipment Directive, known as the Common Charger Requirements. Because that will become a mandatory requirement from the 28th of December 2024 for a list of products such as smartphones that have USB charging ports for a battery. Laptops come in April 2026. And the European Commission is already working on updating the list to include things like AR, VR headsets, game controllers, things like that.
Yeah, but there's drones and all. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a list. Wearable tech and there's quite a list. And common charger really at the moment means USB-C.
Yeah.
So that's why you'll find that any electronics that you're starting to get now, typically you'll find a USB-C. And of course, with smartphones, it's been in sort of the sort of consumer press for some time about certain manufacturers having to change their connector
types.
Yeah.
And it's funny because one thing I think we've mentioned on other videos, and it came up as a big topic from the European Commission at the Red CA, was when you have regulations that almost contradict each other or they cause trouble for each other. So, for example, one of the requirements, one of the background reasons for this common charger is that what they don't want is every time you buy a phone or you buy a camera or you buy some earbuds, you've got to get a charger with it. I'm obviously an engineer, so of course I have a massive box of chargers in my loft just in case I need them one day. But apparently there are people who throw them away. And so all these chargers going to landfill when you buy a new phone every 2 years, for example, and you have a new charger with it, when the old charger was perfectly fine. And so to reduce the electrical waste on landfill, we have this common charger so that you just buy a new product and you've got one charger that you can use for charging all your devices. Keeps these chargers in the circular economy, reduces waste. Great news. Now, as a separate topic, and other ways of reducing electrical waste is there are companies refurbishing old products. So let's say you've got a mobile phone and it's getting a bit tired, maybe the battery is not lasting very well or the screen is cracked, and a company might put a new battery in it, replace the screen and sell it on as a refurbished product. Now, if that product was already on the market in the EU, if they don't modify it, if they use original parts, then they've just repaired it and put it back on the market. So it doesn't need to meet the new requirements. It just needs to work okay, and it was already on the EU market. So if you had a phone that was placed on the market 2 or 3 years ago, maybe it had an unusual connector, or it hadn't been assessed for cybersecurity or anything like that. It didn't even have emergency calling maybe, but that's fine. It was already on the market. Now it's got a new screen and a new battery. It's still on the market. That's fine. It keeps it out of landfill. It keeps that phone in circulation. Everybody's happy. Circular economy. The trouble exists where you have companies that go around to non-EU regions, buying up cheap old phones that don't work anymore, refurbishing them and supplying them to the EU. Again, good business and good circular economy solution. But if that phone didn't come from the EU, then it's never been placed on the market in the EU. And therefore, it needs to meet the requirements now. So you could have a situation, of course, if it was unsafe or causing interference, nobody would want it. But if it's a perfectly working phone, not causing interference, you've got an ironic situation where they could have introduced the common charger requirements to reduce waste to landfill. But then if you've got some smartphone or earbuds or something coming from, let's say, Africa or Asia, comes in, a refurbisher wants to clean it up and sell it to Europe, but they can't because it doesn't meet the common charger requirement, so it goes to landfill because it couldn't meet a requirement that was brought in to keep products out of landfill.
And what you're talking about is just one area of a world that suddenly you scratch the surface and it opens up into a much bigger thing.
Yeah.
Because, again, using those same examples where you might say, oh, the battery on my phone or device isn't holding charge anymore, I need to put a new battery in it, and you buy a non-OEM battery, it might not be built to the same level of quality or standard that the original one is, and you're starting to modify the product a little bit, because a battery these days isn't passive. It has a battery management system in there to make sure that how it's charged to maintain its performance. And you may be making a substantial change to the product in what you think is a like-for-like replacement. And I use battery as an example, but another classic is your screen on the phone as well. You smash the screen, you buy a non-OEM replacement. There's this whole legislation about right to repair as individuals. That gives us the legal ability to repair our own products. But that screen, there's a lot of electronics in there.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, appreciate hearing aid compatibility is not a European requirement, but SAR is, and from a safety point of view, changing the screen, changing the battery can have really quite a fundamental impact on not just performance, electrical interference, but also RF exposure to us as individuals. So it's a really big topic, and I guess that sort of then is a sort of a segue into where do we get this information, where is that held? And the European Commission's got a document called the Blue Guide, where a lot of these horizontal issues on principle are written down, and so there's a common understanding.
So interesting stuff. As Steve said, it's like a huge topic, and when you start to get into it, you think, oh yeah, this is huge. I think the word that was used the most at the Red CO, caught my ear a lot, was the word pragmatic. So we found ourselves having this kind of conversation of there needs to be a pragmatic solution to this. And it ends up being a word that you use when you realise there isn't a legal solution, which kind of brings us to the topic of radios into vehicles.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it was used there quite a lot. Steve talked at length about radios into vehicles, a document that Steve's leading, where vehicle manufacturers have to assess their product to the Radio Equipment Directive, their product being the vehicle, even though the vehicle isn't in scope of the directive. So now you're telling a group of manufacturers to assess their product to a directive that product isn't in scope of. And after much debate, the word pragmatic started getting thrown around quite a lot.
And that's great to hear, actually, because the people that are using the word pragmatic the most will probably be the Commission themselves, actually. And so this is this world of, we have a legal instrument that is light on words and heavy on legal text. And then there's the real world, where manufacturers are trying to read the regulations on one side and work out how it applies to their products on the other. And you're right. I mean, TGN 33, as we call it, is all about putting radio equipment into vehicles. This is a topic that's been, I made the number up, 8 years that we've been developing this TGN, but it's something like that. And the topic really is, from the legal text of the Radio Equipment Directive, we either have radio equipment or we don't. So if you put a piece of radio equipment into a host, the host becomes the radio equipment. However, the European guidance by the Commission says, yes, that's the case, except for if it's a vehicle. And when you put it into a vehicle, this piece of radio equipment, the vehicle doesn't become a piece of radio equipment. So from an engineering and a practical point of view, you think, well, what's different about a vehicle compared to any other host product that you put radio functionality in? And again, it comes back to this word pragmatic, because from a pragmatic point of view, the European Commission doesn't want to consider the whole vehicle as a piece of radio equipment. And this TGN 33 is trying to look at what the law says and then come up with some guidance for manufacturers and us as notified bodies and test labs as to what to do, how to assess those against the appropriate regulations. Now, vehicles are covered under what we call type approval legislation. So that's considered to be old approach, as in there are certain organisations that are allowed to do testing. You test to the letter of the regulation and you send that body of evidence. So element, for example, is what's called a technical service under vehicle legislation. You would send this body of evidence to the type approval authority. Normally it's the government or a government department. And the government department would effectively stamp the product and say, we have approved this product, you can now sell it. As opposed to CE marking, which is new approach, which gives a lot more flexibility to manufacturers. And effectively, we've got these two worlds coming together: old type approval legislation for vehicles, new approach legislation for radio equipment. And the fundamental thing that this TGN is trying to do and provide guidance on is what to do with those two things coming together. If you go to the RED-CA website, we've produced a RefDoc, a reference document, that was some, I was going to say initial feedback and guidance as to what you do, but actually it's much more mature than that. And so through the RED-CA, we took this issue to the European Commission, who have taken the time to study the issue in a lot of detail, and actually they've come up with their own document now that provides some guidance. So we as a group, a little working group within RED-CA, got back together and updated our document to align itself with the latest guidance from the European Commission. There's still work to do there, because the European guidance document is all about type approved vehicles, and our document goes a little bit further. It talks about vehicles which are not subject to type approval. So these are typically things that don't go on the highway, don't have a registration plate on the vehicle themselves. So you could think of construction equipment, some agricultural equipment, those sorts of bits of mobile machinery, for example. And what do you do there? And so, yeah, I'd recommend anybody go to the RED-CA website and go and have a look at the guidance that we've produced. It will be updated, it will continue to be updated as the European guidance gets updated, but it's in itself is another complex area, and we've got to come up with a pragmatic way of dealing with it, which is very much the message from the Commission. Talking of that, I said that the Commission has produced this document on what to do with radio equipment when it's integrated into vehicles. Now they've published that, the intention is, rather than have a standalone document, that guidance will be integrated into a higher level document, which is just general guidance issued by the European Commission on the Radio Equipment Directive itself, so the Red Guide as it's referred to. That's in the process of being updated. With this as one topic, but a number of other topics as well. The sort of main author of that is ADCO. So ADCO, if you're not familiar with it, is there's an acronym, AD as in Administration Cooperation Radio Equipment Directive. So you have ADCO Red, ADCO EMC, ADCO LVD, etc. So ADCO Red are the main author of the Red Guide because they are the market surveillance authorities that ultimately do the policing of this directive and various different regulations. And so that's something that is being drafted at the moment. I don't think we're going to see it in 2024, but fingers crossed we'll see it as an updated document in 2025.
Yeah, I think so. And I would say the sort of feedback about that Red Guide, I think one of the things that we were all hoping to see would be a clearer definition of what they mean by indirectly connected to the internet for cybersecurity requirements. And at the Red CA meeting, they said they do not plan to give any further clarification. They said that the Red Delegating Act states if you connect directly or indirectly to the internet, you're in scope. And they're saying that's up to manufacturers to figure that out. They don't plan to provide any more definitions. So.
Yeah.
And with regard to market surveillance, now obviously anybody watching this video, you're doing the right things because you have great integrity and you understand that most of the tests involved come about for good reasons. But of course, we do worry about market surveillance and what are those people doing. And in Europe, market surveillance, one of the challenges they have at the moment is trying to figure out how are they going to assess products for some of these new requirements. So in the past, EMC or radio, market surveillance could just buy a spectrum analyzer. And in fact, they've set up their own market surveillance test lab. But now they're kind of looking at things like the common charger requirements and saying, well, how do we assess this? Do we just look to see if the connector is USB-C shaped? Or do we also do the tests to check that it can do the fast charging? What about cybersecurity? Do we just check that the declaration has the right standards or some sort of assessment written on it? Or do we actually do a cybersecurity attack test on the product? And if so, how do we do that? So that's a challenge for market surveillance. Another thing they're struggling with is Wi-Fi in the 5 gigahertz band. Now, for years this has been an issue. Where manufacturers are selling a product and maybe it's not set up right or it allows the user to reconfigure it, and so you have a situation where the rules of this band seem clear and everybody's happy with that. The standard seems clear and everybody's happy with it, and yet there are still complaints of interference in the 5 or 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi bands.
And that's of meteorological
weather radar.
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so any kind of 5 or 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi, they have these things known as dynamic frequency selection or contention-based protocol, where it should be able to detect signals and move away from it. And so that's a big issue. And speaking of the CBP, or the contention-based protocol tests, the FCC did a project recently where they looked on their website and saw 3 certified products, which obviously had test reports, showed that a product passed. So then they contacted those manufacturers and asked for an off the production line sample to do their own testing of, and then they went onto the market and bought. So then they had the original test reports from certification, they had some production samples sent by the manufacturer, and they had some samples that they bought from the market, and they tested the 2 that they'd received and compared to the original. And it was a surprise, maybe it wasn't a surprise, quite different results. So some of them failing the ones that they bought on the market, which were worse than the ones sent by the manufacturer, which were worse than the ones originally used for certification. So lots of market surveillance activities in progress.
Yeah, so if you're, I was just thinking about what's next in terms of market surveillance. I think it's remote controlled toys is going to be the focus for next year. So if you're a manufacturer of those sorts of products, watch out.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm conscious of time. Yeah. The ETSI did an update on standards. I guess really the summary of that was ETSI's continues to write great standards for the telecommunications industry. Lots of new standards coming through. But then equally, there's lots of standards which are still harmonised at the moment, and some of those the Commission is thinking about delisting, if you like, from the official journal, because state of the art has moved on, the technology has been superseded, and so there are a list of standards. Probably we won't go into detail on that now, but equally, if you're making ITS, so Intelligent Transport System related products, your standard is in the crosshairs for sort of being delisted, as it were. And then there's work that's being done on emerging technologies, so certainly higher in frequency, but also other areas as well. So satellite communication, direct satellite communication for low orbiting satellites, for example, a lot of work being done in that area as well. Yeah. So ETSI did an update. The European CEPT, the European Radio Communications Office, did an update on things that they're working on going forward. Just reminded me, you were talking about common charger earlier on, and the Commission is just in the process now of considering the extension of common charger to include wireless charging.
Correct, yeah.
So that's something that if you are a manufacturer of WPT devices, be aware of that, because again, going back to your whole circular economy thing, if you've got a wireless charger that you can put multiple devices on that enables them to just be charged without having to replace the charger each time, then WPT, as well as a conductive solution, is
Yeah. So the European Commission, I guess they've looked at the legal text for the common charger requirements and realised it doesn't exclusively limit them to wired charging. So as Steve said, picking a type of wireless charger such that you could just own a wireless charger and then use that for all of your products.
So you and I, we could go on for hours talking about these things.
We often
I'm
do.
conscious that people may be listening to this part of their working day.
Their battery's going to run out.
Absolutely, and they've got a day job to do.
Yeah.
So we'll probably draw it to a close now. Just to let you know, though, Michael and I are doing some niche videos or more selective topics that will perhaps take a little bit of a deeper dive into. So make sure you tune in and look out for those, because they'll come out over the next couple of months or so. I guess probably, do we say Happy Christmas? Happy Holidays.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Best, but have you got your decorations up yet?
No. There is a line in our house.
Yeah.
December.
1st of December.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll keep sticking to that. So
if you celebrate it, have a good holiday.
Absolutely. And be sure to check out our other videos and
to our North American friends, happy Thanksgiving, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy CRA Publication Day.
Oh yeah. CRA Publication Day. Well, we'll definitely cover that because today it was published on the official journal. So we'll definitely cover that in our cybersecurity talk.
Okay, I'm conscious that everyone's got a day job to do, so we're going to draw it to a close now. If you've enjoyed this content, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel because we've got more material coming out. There's also old material that we've generated as well. And then also on element.com, make sure that you subscribe to our updates. Between Michael, myself and many of our other Element colleagues, we provide regular content on what's happening in the industry, specific topics like we talked about cybersecurity, radio equipment, what's happening with the FCC. We're regularly doing those updates, so make sure that you subscribe to those, and then it'll come into your inbox as soon as we've done an update. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.